My name is Andrea Brunswick. I'm going to share today with you my story on grief and loss, destruction, and coming through the fire. I'm the product of a blended family. Both of my parents had been married prior. I have an older brother and an older sister, and then my parents had me. Now, I really was what would be called a daddy's girl. My sister was 10 years older than myself. My brother is 9 years older than me. I honestly thought my sister was like my mother. I would sit on the curb and wait for her to come home crying because she went out with her friends. There was really something very special about my parents, and my home was loved by all of my friends. So it was my house where my friends would come over. Listen, it was not a perfect home, and I certainly don't want to lead any of you to feel like, oh, I grew up in this perfect surroundings, because I didn't. Because now that I understand, my mother obviously had issues. That was her second marriage. My father got sick when I was 18 years of age, and it was 4 years before he had passed, and he was in and out of hospitals, needing to be brought back to life, revived back to life. It was a very scary time. I was always used to my mother being in a hospital as a child, but my father, no, not so much. In any case, my father died June 20th, 1985. And honestly, at that moment, my life completely changed. In September of 1985, I met what would have been my future husband. And I just want to share this little bit with you, because I was not a girl who ever wanted a boyfriend. In fact, I didn't want boyfriends. I saw friends of mine having boyfriends in middle school and high school, and no, I was happy with my group of friends. I was happy being free. I had lots of boys that were your friends, and I was fine. But I met my husband, and I said to my cousin, because she was with me at the time, I'm going to marry him. There was an after-hours club in the Toronto area that, of course, I had been going to prior, probably for the last 3 years. And I was there. I brought my cousin, my older cousin, and a friend of mine for the very first time. And they left. And then the owner of the after-hours said if I wanted to work there on the weekends. And I obviously had drank a little too much and just done a little bit too much drugs. And I said, sure. I met him literally my first night as a waitress. And he asked if I wanted to sit down with him and his friends, and we were chatting. And I thought, well, he's very interesting. Then on the weekend, on the Sunday when I wasn't working, I went in with my cousin. George was there, lo and behold. And we sat next to each other at the bar, and we were just talking. And we were talking about everything and anything. And I was sharing about my family and my nieces and my nephews. And I remember him saying something like, no, you know what? I really think you would be an amazing mother. When I think back, I didn't even think he was good looking. Like I said to my cousin, I don't know, there's just something about him, but honestly, I really don't think he's that good looking. And not that looks really mattered that much to me, but let's face it, we comment. I said I'm going to marry him, but because I didn't care about boyfriends, and I'd hang with you for a month, just trying to be PG about everything. And I thought, fine, if I don't ever see you again after 30 days, I don't see you after 30 days. But funny enough, 2 weeks later, we moved in together. And this is important. I had just moved back home with my mother because I wasn't living at home prior to my father's passing. Now, my brother and sister, by the time I was 13, they were already married and out of the house. And they already had started their young families. And I really internalized that so very deeply. Like I thought I was supposed to now step into the role. When I think back, man, I was so lost. I think my spiraling started to escalate because I no longer had my father, who I was very much a daddy's girl. It was he and I. He would take me to the movies. I have to tell you, man, I was lost. What I did start to recognize was something is not right with me. So when George and I first got together, again, where did I meet him? I met him in an after hours. It's not like I met him at church. I was experiencing, which I didn't understand, but I was experiencing abandonment very severely. If George said he would be home at 8 and it was 9 and he wasn't home, this massive anxiety and panic would take over. And I started to spiral into a depression. We lived together for 3 years prior to getting married. And I remember the night he asked my mom if he could ask for my hand in marriage, and we had company, my aunts and uncles were over. And of course she said yes. She really took to him for the first from the first moment that she met him. And she took to his family, and his family was really wonderful. And my father-in-law really stepped into the role of really replacing. You can't really replace your parent, but giving me that fatherly role. As the wedding was coming closer, and as I wasn't as excited as one would have thought one would be, I recognized I got to do something about this. Something is not right here. So I started to seek out help. I spoke to my family doctor, who was my doctor since I was 9, and he had been my parents' doctor. So he really knew the family, and he sent me to a psychologist. So I started to seek out this help and really not getting anywhere with it. And then George and I thought we needed, because we were living together for 3 years. So as far as I was concerned, we were married. Went to like a marriage counselor type of thing. And I'm still blaming and I'm still shaming more other people than myself. We get married, beautiful wedding, absolutely, truly. It really was a beautiful wedding. And we went on a fabulous honeymoon. Now, George had been working for the airlines at the time. So we went on an open ticket and we thought, well, we'll just stay until the money runs out. We went to Rome and we went to Greece and we traveled some of the Greek islands. So we were away for about 8 weeks and then we came home. It was a mask and I wore it really well. I smiled. I knew how to talk the talk. Some days I knew how to walk the walk, but there were days where honestly I couldn't even walk the walk. And the perception of me by my siblings at this time really changed. They started to look at me as though I was lazy, that I was very unmotivated. I didn't finish my last year. I shamed myself. I didn't have the capability to concentrate. There was definite depression, but the shaming and the blaming that were coming at me really started to overwhelm me, and things just spiraled more and more and more out of control. George and I were married and living together a total of 8 years prior to us having our first child and our son Ryan. He was wild. I was wild. I really settled down when I met him. It took him a little bit longer. It was a little bit irritating, but there was such a genuine spirit to him and a kindness and a love. And truly, the way I saw him treat my mother. I was asked what was it that really got me more and more in love with him. Truly was that. And I saw how wonderful he was with my mother and the attention and the time and the fact that he didn't have any issues of, well, George, I moved back home with my mom and this is kind of where I need to stay. So if you're not okay with that, see you later. And he was like, no, I totally understand. And I thought, wow, because I got to tell you, most guys at 23 would not be okay with living with their, even though we were common law, future mother-in-law. Our families were very intertwined. My in-laws were wonderful. They included my mother in everything. So I really felt this inclusiveness and this family of stuff that I was missing because of the passing of my father. I didn't understand how my depression was getting worse and worse, and I kept seeking out more help. It was 1989, so it was a year after we got married. A friend of mine who I had grown up with was seeing a psychiatrist. So she referred me to her psychiatrist, and I went to her. As you have to do with mental health professionals, you always have to give background. So this doctor's asking me for background, and I'm telling her, and I was telling her what had transpired the last 4 years, the last 6 years. She tells me I'm depressed. Yeah, okay. Tell me something that I don't know. There was a drug that had just come on the market and it was called Prozac, and it was an antidepressant. And I thought, okay, this doctor's telling me that I need to take it. I'm going to take it. Well, my suicidal ideology was heightening. Well, I took the whole bottle. I really wanted to be with my father. George found out that I swallowed the whole bottle of pills and rushed me to the hospital. Can't tell you that I really remember if they pumped my stomach or how they were able to get rid of the antidepressants in my system. But they kept me overnight. At the beginning of 1992, my sister got very sick and my nieces and nephews were little. So George said, you know what, Andrea, I think maybe it would be a really good idea for you to go to Florida and spend some time. My mom had gone down and go there. And it was that time that I was there from March until June that I was able to work my way out of the depression without any medication. I started to, not a gym, but And then in a strip plaza where you'd go in and you'd do these aerobic classes. So between helping my sister and kind of being their nanny, I would go 3 classes a day. I would do classes in the morning, then I would go back after dinner. The starting to feel more like myself was coming back. So now we're back in Toronto and it's June and I'm so excited to be back home and I'm so excited to see my husband. And there was my little miracle baby, my son, Ryan, who, oh my God. And that was the start of a new me. And 1997, I then got pregnant with our daughter, Natalie. I drove to the bank, and that was the last thing I remember. I was in the left turn lane to come home, and the next thing I know, I woke up. I was in the hospital on a stretcher board in the emergency room. I had been knocked unconscious, and I hear George saying, "My wife is pregnant." The car was written off. They couldn't really tell me what my injuries were other than they could see that I had a broken collarbone and obviously I had a concussion and I had amnesia. And they sent me home, which I kind of thought was weird. Called me back the next day for an ultrasound. Intuitively, I knew I was having a girl because they always said, or I had always heard, that girl babies are much stronger than boy babies. October the 27th, 1997, my bundle of joy, my daughter Natalie, was born. Beautiful. She looked exactly like her brother. Again, another phenomenal baby. I was very blessed. And, you think life is really good, right? George was such a loving father, and he truly got that from his own father because they were best friends. October of 1992, my husband lost his grandmother, who was the love of his life. In February 2003, my father-in-law passed. He had had cancer. That destroyed my husband. It was so hard for him to lose his father. And then Mother's Day of 2003, we're burying George's other grandmother. 2 weeks later, my sister came in with her husband from Florida. The kids went to bed and George went to bed. Tuesday would be back to work and back to school. I woke up Tuesday morning and I was trying to wake George up because it was time he'd have to get ready. I couldn't wake George up. And I see my son, who had just turned 10, and he said, "Daddy won't wake up." The ambulance came, the fire department came, the police came. They tried to revive him. It was so full of people, and they had blocked off my bedroom door as they were in there trying to revive him. When they told me that they couldn't, I had to take my 5.5-year-old. I'm sorry. I had to take my 5.5-year-old and my 10-year-old, and I needed to now tell them that their dad went to go join their Dido, their Yaya, and their Bubbo. And he wasn't coming back. You don't often realize at the moment of how impactful a circumstance and how life-altering it would be. I was a mess, an absolute mess. We were tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And to be honest with you, at 40, I didn't think I'd be a widow. You often think you'll be divorced. I couldn't go to work. I would be in the kitchen like Niagara Falls. I couldn't have stopped the crying even if I wanted to. A month or so after George's passing, so I believe the kids were in day camp at this point, I dropped them off and I came home and I went onto the deck and I was smoking like a flippin' chimney, having thoughts. How could I kill myself and my children in one clean sweep so that now we would be able to be back together as a family? But by the grace of God, Isabel, my angel that day, answered the phone and she said, "Andrea, I need to tell you something, and that is so important for you to hear. Everything that you're thinking and you're experiencing is normal. It is part of grief." I don't think I had been breathing up until that moment. Ryan got hit by a massive depression when he was 17, and it was all of the grief. I believe it was a year after that, Natalie, who now just started high school at 15, was at the community center on a Friday evening with a friend of hers, and they were walking home, and she was hit by a car. Thank God, it could have been so much worse. Now we start a lawsuit for her because the other kids that got hit when she got hit, their parents were going. I get a call from the neuropsychologist's office. Well, now they've completed everything. They've received all of her medical records from her pediatrician, all of her school records, and they're proceeding to tell me what had been going on with my daughter. And I felt sick because everything that Natalie had been experiencing was post-traumatic stress. So I'm here today with a purpose, and that purpose is to share my story. It's okay to not feel like yourself. You're not alone. There's help out there. You just have to say, I want help. And this truly has been a blessing to me. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for this space and allowing me to share my story again. I'm Andrea Brunswick, and thank you so much.